Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm your host, Dave West, CEO here at Scrum.org in a damp and wet New England. Today's podcast is going to be a great one because we've got the opportunity to talk to two very interesting professional Scrum trainers and active Agile community members, Todd Miller and Ryan Ripley. You may know Todd and Ryan from their very famous podcast, Agile for Humans, a very popular podcast, far more popular than this one. So maybe I'll also learn a little bit about running a podcast today. I hope so. Welcome to our podcast, Todd and Ryan.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for having us.
Wow.
Good to be here.
It's great to have you both here. So before we get into the meat of the topic today, I'd love to hear a little bit, and our listeners would love to hear a little bit about who you are and where are you speaking to us from.
You want to go first, Ryan? I want to see what you'd say so that I know what format.
I'll fumble through it, then you'll sound great. So my name's Ryan Ripley. I am in Valparaiso, Indiana, and it is gloomy here as well, Dave. It is for those of you that don't know, it's in Northwest Indiana. So we're technically like a suburb of Chicago, but in a different state. What do? I spend my time running kids around. And so I coach Pop Warner, 10U football. I run my daughter to gymnastics. My oldest son plays middle school football. I am basically just running from sport to sport to sport, in between trying to teach a few professional Scrum courses with Todd here and there as well.
Great, thanks. And yes, we are Uber of our children, aren't we?
Yes,
that's for sure. But we don't get any tips, and yes,
just a lot of angst and smart mouths. That's my tip.
Yes. So Todd, where are you talking to us from?
I am speaking from York, Pennsylvania. Right now, it's actually mostly cloudy, a little bit of sun peeking through in the background, which is nice. We had the rain yesterday, which is good. We needed it here. I also am a Uberer of children. Although in 6 months, my daughter will have her driver's license and she just bought her first car. So she bought her car, we're going to get it fixed up, and then I will be half of an Uber then just for my son. So other than that, been a professional Scrum trainer now for almost 8 years, Dave.
I know. It's a long time. Both of you have been in this community a long time, which is great. So, okay, let's get into the content. Today we want to talk about a new class that was recently launched called Professional Scrum Product Backlog Management Skills class. This is a class aimed at really equipping learners with the skills necessary to better manage their product backlog, and lots of challenges there. I know that I personally have seen a lot of organizations wrestle with creating product backlogs. Often they just look like teamwork backlogs. So I'd really be interesting to hear, you two have been heavily involved in the development, working with our team at Scrum.org and the community of Scrum.org professional trainers. So I'd love to hear your take on why we needed this class. What's the motivation behind it? I don't know, Ryan, if you want to kick that off.
Sure. Yeah, it's over the last few years, we've just seen a shift where we teach a lot of the product owner courses, and that does a great job of providing a foundation to product managers and Scrum masters and business analysts on what professional Scrum actually is. And how it can be used as an advantage from a product management, product ownership perspective, right? But then we were getting a lot of people coming back 6, 12, 18 months later saying, I'm not sure what I'm doing. There is some confusion in, is this a good product backlog? Am I doing this right? What the heck is product backlog refinement? Why is my sprint review not getting what all sorts of questions started popping up from past students. You mentioned the podcast as well, where we used to take a question a day. There's like 500 videos out there and a lot of the questions were starting to converge into, the skill of product backlog management. A lot of questions about how many items should be on a product backlog. How do I know that my PBIs are in good shape? How do I know that my product backlog is bringing transparency to the product for my Scrum team and stakeholders? And so Todd actually really started collecting a lot of these items. He started building out a mural. And over time, we just started looking at, wow, there's a gap here. And I shouldn't even say gap, I should say opportunity to help these product owners and product managers and business analysts level up how they manage a product backlog. And so we started teaching and working through some material. Then of course, we worked with you, Dave, and your team, and we said, hey, we see an opportunity here. We've got some material here that we've just started to work through. And of course, the Scrum.org staff jumped in and said, yeah, this is an interesting opportunity. It fit well in the skills-based portfolio that you all have established through facilitation and now product backlog management. It's just a good fit. We've always worked well together, and we saw the opportunity, and I think everyone kind of jumped in and executed on it.
Yeah, and obviously the broader community got heavily involved as well, providing, as they like to, feedback and
Yep.
and really helped us refine a pretty awesome experience for learners, we hope. Todd, so you were heavily involved in sort of marshalling this group of seemingly random questions that all sort of coalesce towards help me with my product backlog. Tell me a little bit about that and that journey.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think back to the times where I was a product owner and I made a ton of mistakes in how I manage a product backlog. And you start to hear themes in consulting and training of all those people making all those same mistakes, right? And to be honest with you, most of the mistakes I made was by over managing it. And so trying to take something and take a one day or just to sit with people in a classroom setting and show them the things that I wish I would have had, like almost like a letter to my future self. If I could take something back in time to first version Todd of product owner, I wish I knew just some of these simple things so that I kept my product backlog simple. And I think that's the hope of what people will get out of this class, is that we tend to overcomplicate it. We tend to overmanage it. And one of my favorite quotes of all time, if you've been around me at all, you'll know that I love Yvon Chouinard from Patagonia. It's to simplify yields a richer result. And that's what this is all about, right? It's really what it's all about. Oftentimes by simplicity, you can create transparency, and that helps you manage your product backlog and make it more transparent.
I love and I don't know who said this, one of you two may have said this, that a good product backlog is like a really good garden. It is managed, looks great, different people can get everything they know out of it. Some areas a little less managed than others, but it's clear that they are not as managed. It's also, provides a great experience. It isn't a mess. Everybody knows it's not a mess, and people like going there to, for whatever reason. I'm not sure it's a great analogy, but it definitely makes me think that of what a good product backlog is. I've seen product backlogs that are massively overly managed, and that are everything's perfect, and then nobody wants to do anything with them because you daren't break anything. And then I've seen them that are so messy that they really should be condemned. And and then all degrees between that. So great. I see the motivation, I see the potential impact. So I guess our listeners would be interested to hear a little bit about what's in the class. So if one of you wants to take us through this experience.
Yeah, Ryan, should we maybe start with the four areas of the class, the four sections? Should we start there?
Yeah, I think that could make sense. We start off with really understanding your stakeholder, right? We want to get rooted very early that great product ownership really starts at collaboration with a stakeholder, with an end user, with a customer. We're really trying to, right off the bat, get rid of this myth that the product owner just knows and you don't have to talk to anybody, and you've got to talk to people to understand what you need to build. And so we established that very quickly up front. We try to root people in. The purpose of the product backlog is expressing the needs of other people. We're trying to deliver value into other people's lives. We're trying to solve other people's problems, right? So there should be a connection between the product goals that we're trying to solve or deliver on, which, you know, our product backlog emerges from, and there should be a great connection there to stakeholder. And so we work through that in the first section of the course. We offer some tools that product owners can use to better understand their stakeholders and to also be intentional about how they communicate to the stakeholders. So we want to make sure that, you know, our students walk away from this first section understanding, look, you need to spend some time figuring out what people really need. And you can only do that by talking with the people whose problems you're solving, but also understand there's internal and external and users and customers and buyers and all sorts of other stakeholders that you're working with that need to be managed and communicated with and dealt with in different ways. And so be intentional about that communication plan, about that stakeholder management, and really just giving them the tools and ideas and awareness to do that. I think that's a good way to express that first section. What do you think, Todd?
Yeah, and you know, to one of our good buddies, Simon Reindl, it always stands out to me how he speaks of the product owner as an opinion aggregator. Right, they're a decision maker, but and they make the ultimate decision, but they're opinion aggregators from these internal stakeholders and customers, right? And to be able to understand what you do and what you don't do is ultimately in the product owner's hands, and to really center on the fact too that everything on the product backlog is a hypothesis of value. So all these conversations could actually be blinding as well. Just because people say they need it doesn't mean they'll actually need it. So that's another interesting thing that we tend to talk about in that section, understanding your stakeholders. I really like Simon's thought on opinion aggregator. That's stuck with me for many years. So shout out to Simon Reindl there.
Cool. So what's section 2 then?
So section 2, Ryan, I'll maybe brief that one. Section 2 is all about how you define your product backlog. So we've just gone over understanding your stakeholders, your customers, all these things. And when we talk about defining your product backlog, one of the first things we start on is Scrum Guide 2020 started out with this concept and this commitment called a product goal, a longer term objective for a Scrum team, right? And then we go into some nitty gritty details on how you could potentially define your product goal. And then things like levels of decomposition in your product backlog item attributes, common formats for things like user stories, job stories, hypothesis-driven development. And all along the way, we are walking through a case study where class attendees are using components of this case study and some of these techniques that we've offered about defining your product backlog. And they're building one. Right? They're building one, and then the instructor is giving you real-time feedback on why it was good or why maybe a nudge on something that you could potentially have done a little bit better. With the idea some of these simple techniques that we can use can be brought back into your environment and used in your product backlogs, right? And so this is really kind of where the pavement hits the road in the class, where the students are creating a product backlog, the instructor's working with them, giving them tooling and giving them nudges and viewing it and giving feedback as a class holistically on how the product backlogs are structured. What would you add, Ryan?
I just love the simplicity of the tools, right? The whole course is built around the idea that a product owner should be able to take what they learned in the one-day course with us and with any other PST that they take the course from, and the next day apply these tools. Like, they should not have to go off and do another 6 months of research before they can understand how to apply these things. The next day, they should start doing the things that are discussed, you know, in these sections. And, you know, Todd's done a great job of selecting a lot of really good defining your product backlog type ideas. You know, we'll give one away here. We talk about the user story format, for example. As a certain type of user, I want something awesome so that I get value. Like that old school, everybody knows that format. It's like, come on, we've been there, done that. We give options. We talk about different formats. We talk about different ways to express value, even simpler ways, right? That product owners can instantly use. And I think that part's really neat. And it flows, you know, not only are they learning these things, but they're applying them to a real product backlog. Todd and I give a lot of feedback. We spend a lot of time saying, well, that's really an activity. That's not a PBI. Let's work on how we express value, not just activity. And so they get a deep dive. I think part of what's cool about this course, Dave, is that, you know, as Todd was talking about, we work with them, but we show them what is potentially a good PBI and what isn't. And that's not really talked about a lot in the community, right? How many posts are on any site that says, here's a really good PBI? And there's not a lot of those, right? And so they get just a instant in real-time feedback, a lot of directing, a lot of coaching, there's even some mentoring in there too. It's just some really good instant feedback on the work they're doing, and you can see them leveling up as we go. And it's kind of neat to see as they continue to work through this product backlog. The next section is product backlog refinement. So we make product backlog refinement this big idea that, hey, you have to curate. It's like the garden analogy that you gave, Dave. If you don't weed the garden, if you don't limit what's in the planter box, if you don't make sure that the plants that they're not compatible, your garden is a mess. And so now this idea of product backlog refinement is that, look, you need to slice down your work. You need to slice down your product backlog. You need to make sure that the things that you're putting in the product backlog are the essential things. We're teaching almost, this section is fun because it's almost, we're teaching them to be lazy. We want Scrum teams to do the minimal but sufficient to meet a need, to meet a product goal, and nothing else. Because that minimal but sufficient, that, it goes back to the manifesto. Years and years ago, over 20 years ago, that simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. That to me is a product owner mantra, right? Let's do the minimal to hit this, but the only way to know what minimal is to do refinement. We need to think about our work. We need to slice down our work. We need to come up with the cheapest, easiest, quickest experiment that tells us whether or not something's valuable. And so that third section that we've put in is really all about how do we go from idea to in a customer's hand as soon as responsibly possible with the minimal but sufficient product backlog items and ideas. And that's where I think that's where a lot of light bulbs go off. Todd has picked some really great tools here. I think his use of the Kano model and the way that it's described and taught in this professional Scrum course is unique. And I think it really gives the product owners an instant tool to go and be successful in the ordering of their work and the expression of value. And I think they're just going to be able to, be a better aggregator of opinions, right? Because Dave, this. You do a lot of product stuff, and you have a community of PSTs who are not short on opinions, and you've got to aggregate all of and we all think we're right. And this is a hard aspect of product ownership. This I see you nodding. The podcast people don't see you nodding and smiling, but this is a huge part of it. These tools can really help them distill down to what's essential.
Well, and that is a key skill that I've barely got. Some days I feel like I've got it, and then the next day it all goes horribly wrong. But you express these ideas, these concepts, these backlog management items, these PBIs, product backlog items, and you need to express them in a way that people can readily provide feedback, that ensures that they're transparent, that people can understand what they're not and what they are, whilst managing the fact that everybody reads them differently. And so refinement is a key activity I found personally of improving that definition, that structure, that whatever the information that we provide, to really help get to the heart of that moment. It's excellent. All right, so we've got stakeholders, product backlog, the structure. We've now done refinement. What's the last section? What's section 4?
Yeah, so the last section is on how you create transparency. And we start off there by, in my opinion, and I've been saying this for years, and I think people are actually starting to listen. Ryan knows this is one of my big tangents. The most underserved event in Scrum to me is the sprint review. So you see all these unbelievable formats for sprint retrospectives where you're in Hogwarts and doing all this crazy things in retrospectives, but your sprint review was a 10 deck or 10 slide PowerPoint presentation that was a single direction communication to your stakeholders and did not enable a collaborative conversation.
Todd, you forgot the demo.
Yeah, right. It's just the demo. And so to me, your retrospective is all for naught unless you appropriately are doing inspection, adaptation, and creating transparency in a sprint review. So we start right out of the gate. To create transparency, you need to properly leverage a sprint review. But that's not the only way you need to create transparency in your product backlog. That's a start. We really want people to even build agendas for the next sprint review there. And then you have to start to think about how you're communicating with others outside of that sprint review. Like there's going to be other opportunities as a product owner. So this is a section where we kind of lean in is, as a product owner, how are you going to communicate with internal stakeholders, customers, and the Scrum team outside of those Scrum events? Because it does require that. It does require a lot of communication. And we talk about things like roadmaps and how you could leverage roadmaps to create transparency. There's a million different ideas on how you create a roadmap. We lean in just to some simple example ones. And then really about creating transparency, the big thing that we really kind of rub in the entire class is that everything is a hypothesis. Just because it's on the product backlog is no guarantee that it's going to become valuable. And this was something that I really had to learn like the hard way as a product owner. You get married to an idea, you're really excited about it, you spend a lot of time on it, a lot of money on it, and you put it out there and it's something that no one uses. And you're flabbergasted. It's an insult. You feel bad about it. You don't understand what to do next. You're picking things up and you're just like, everything's a hypothesis. I need to find smaller ways to test my hypothesis. And I need to test them in production because the only way to know something is valuable is when it's in a customer's hands. So we really emphasize that and those sorts of things in this creating transparency section.
It is interesting that you mentioned that. I had a eureka moment when we were working through this and talking about this. That eureka moment is ultimately, even if it's a little feature that we're adding that you're like, oh, why do we need, let's just say exactly how it works rather than spend any time on why, any time on outcomes, any time on value, because we know that people want this. It's, of course, you know, and the amount of realizations that we came to when we did that, when we actually stepped back, forced ourselves, and actually looked at these, you know, features outside the context of a very strongly held belief that this is the must, this is how we must do it, etc. And the amount of times we went, well, you know, somebody has said, well, you know, we could do it like this and it'd be a lot easier. Well, do we know that'll work? Well, we don't. What's the cheapest, easiest we can do? Well, this. Well, let's try it. Okay. And suddenly something that was so in stone has become a little bit less, in a way that actually has allowed us to deliver value quicker and actually solve the customer's problems faster. And I think that I'm still not always good at that. Sometimes because I like my opinions, they're mine, and nobody's going to tell me that I'm wrong. And I have pressed forward, but I really like that. And it's interesting how you weave it into transparency and you weave it into the sprint review. I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's just one of those hard things. I just remember that gut-wrenching feeling I had after I had a team invest a lot of time and I invested a lot of money for a feature. And everybody said that they wanted it. Everybody said that the stakeholders were validating my opinion on it, and so were customers. And we shipped it, and nobody used it. And that was just like, I'll never forget that moment as a product owner and trying to think of how I could make that smaller, how I could make that faster, how I could test that hypothesis sooner, so that I didn't have that gut-wrenching feeling. And that's still going to happen. I mean, this is complexity. It's still going to happen, but we like to make sure that the way you're setting expectations in your environment is that nothing is a guarantee, right?
And it's interesting. I just reminded me of Gillette. There's a case study that I did a similar thing to this, podcast on with their head of R&D, Dave Ingram. And he was talking about the fact that one of the best things about the sprint review, they had a PBI that was basically about price and go to market, etc. And they just aired this PBI in a different way at a sprint review. From doing some work, it shone a light on this PBI, and the senior stakeholder, I think it was even the CEO of Gillette, said, no, No, I just said that in passing. Really? That's not. No, we're not doing it like, you don't have to do it like that. And suddenly that changed their trajectory with the exfoliating razor, which many of you may use, the latest razor from Gillette. And it really just happened in a sprint review where they used the sprint review to shine a light on a PBI that was in stone, they thought, that really wasn't. And it changed everything and meant they got one of their most effective, most amazing, in fact, I used it this morning, razors out to market, faster, cheaper, better for the customer. I mean, everything, just this one little thing, which is really, really interesting. Cool. So stakeholders, structure of your backlog, product backlog, refinement, how you can minimally sort of create this minimal product backlog that delivers the value that you seek, and then transparency. Anything else about this class in terms of its structure and that our listeners would love to know?
I'd say it's experiential, right? So we want the tools to be applied and in a case study. So we give a case study in the class. We want the tools to be applied to it. We want students to have a little bit of muscle memory, I guess, brain muscle memory, so that they can take the tools and go back and apply them immediately. We want them to have done it, so it feels a little bit more comfortable when you're applying it in your real world. Would you have anything else to add, Ryan?
No, I think that's the key thing to zero in on. You spend a lot of time building a real product backlog. You get a lot of feedback from the professional Scrum trainer leading your course. It's a lot of hands-on, but you also get every tool that we introduce. I believe you get time with constructive feedback to experiment with and use. So again, it really, after that day of with your trainer, that next day you can start applying these, and that's by design, right? So it's experiential, but it's also practical. The skills-based course should lead to a new skill, or at least the development of a new skill. And so we've been really intentional in that space, that every tool you can start using the next day and hopefully start seeing improvement, not only in the product backlog, the artifact itself, but I think even more importantly, the collaboration that you have as a product owner between yourself and the stakeholders, yourself and the customers, and yourself and the Scrum team. I think applying these tools and ideas well will lead to a much better relationship between the product owner and the developers, and the product owner and the stakeholders. And so that's why we think Scrum Masters could benefit, why we think product owners could benefit, why business analysts could benefit. It raises the bar of collaboration. It brings transparency to our intentions, and that's got to lead to good things, right?
Yeah, I think a good product backlog ultimately is incredibly important for the whole team and the value that team's going to deliver, and the stakeholders that are interacting with that team, and ultimately the customers of the product or service that's being developed. I mean, a good product backlog, it's funny. It's just when it's there, when it's good, everything is better. When it's bad, everything is worse, and that is a real challenge. So I guess for our listeners, you heard it, Ryan kind of summarized it there. If you're working with product backlogs every day, if some days you feel your product backlog could be a little bit better, this is the class for you. This is a skills-based class, experiential, get to play with product backlogs using the tools that are described and taught. And so at the end of the day, you'll get to know what a good product backlog looks like, what a good product backlog item looks like. So gentlemen, we like to keep these short. We could talk for hours about bad backlogs, good product backlogs. But what should we leave our listeners with as we finish this podcast today?
I would say a critical aspect of professional Scrum, and what sets apart Scrum from professional Scrum, in my opinion, is collaboration, right? Professionals work together. Professionals work together well. Professionals collaborate. And one of the key things that Scrum teams collaborate around is the product backlog, right? The product backlog is a connection to customer. It's how developers know how they're serving a customer well. It's a connection to our internal stakeholders. It's a connection to value. It's a connection to solving a problem. And so if our product backlog is in excellent shape, if it's well built, if it's transparent, if it's well understood, that collaboration is enhanced, and that's got to be a competitive advantage. And so as professionals, we seek those advantages, we work hard to earn those advantages. And I think leveling up our understanding and our skills around the product backlog is a very clear, clean, and easy way to raise the bar for that whole team. And I think that's an important thing, especially in that context of professional Scrum.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Todd, anything to add to that fantastic description?
Yeah, just to put yes, and the product backlog holds the future of the work that the Scrum team is going to work on. It's where the future state of your product that you hypothetically think is going to bring value right now. It's where that exists in Scrum.
Yeah.
Right. And other methodologies and other places it might exist somewhere else, but it is on the product backlog. And in order for a person that, like a product owner, to be that opinion aggregator and to leave no stone unturned, it needs to be transparent. And through all the collaboration that Ryan was talking about before, you run a lot of risks that people aren't in the know with what's happening, and that your product backlog isn't properly adapted because of that. And so you might be missing something out in your organization that could be of great value to your customer because of the way your product backlog is structured, whether it's really messy and needs to be simplified, or whether it's really barren. And I think, as you said, Dave, it should be like quarantined or something. So it's really important, right? This is the catalyst of the future of your product and the product backlog, and it needs to be treated as such.
You heard it there, ladies and gentlemen. It is the catalyst. It is a very important artifact and crucial to effectively delivering value to your customers and making the right choices. It's all about choices. We know that. We've got to make choices about delivering on that product goal. And if you do not have an effective product backlog, if you've not managed it effectively, those choices will be hazy and hard to make. A good product backlog helps you make those choices more effective. That's from my experience, having written many bad product backlogs and continuing to do that on a regular basis, in spite of all you all telling me how bad they are. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Todd, Ryan, for spending the time with us today, talking a little bit about a class that's recently launched, Professional Scrum Product Backlog Management Skills class, and a little bit about the motivation, the why, and then really a good description, a deep dive into the 4 sections around stakeholders, around structure, around refinement, and obviously transparency. Interesting idea around transparency and the importance of the sprint review, an event that is very poorly understood in most organizations. So it's great that we can use this as an opportunity with the backlog, the product backlog, to improve that very important event as well, which is great. So thank you, gents.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having us. It's fun. Always good to talk to you.
It is always a pleasure. I always learn a little bit more of a add to my list of Todd's things that Todd gets angry about. I have this growing list every time I talk to him, which is always good. It's still only on 1 page at the moment, so it's always good. So thanks for coming, and for our listeners, thank you so much for attending today. Hopefully this has been informative. Hopefully it's helped you make the right choice around whether this class is right for you. My name's Dave West, CEO here at Scrum.org, talking to you on the Scrum.org community podcast. Thank you for your time, and Scrum on.